Good afternoon. My name is Larry Collins Burton. Collins was named after my dad's name, and I was born on July 28th, 1940 in the University Hospital in Edmonton. And I was born to Collie and Julie Burton from Duffield, Alberta. And we lived in a place called Bad Lake, just 6 miles south of Duffield, on a farm. And I was the youngest out of 8 kids. My mother's maiden name was Moldenhauer, which was an old-timer name from the area of Mewasan country. And my older brothers, Mitchell and Janie, Richard, Irene, Fred, Grace, Howard, and myself, Larry.
Okay, sorry. Oh.
And in 1942, we moved from Bad Lake to Wabamun with 3 of us youngest kids. And we settled in Wabamun and been pretty well here ever since 1942.
What was your reason for coming to Wabamun?
We moved to Wabamun in 1942. My father was a logger and a farmer, and decided to retire to Wabamun to live with a cousin of ours, Wilbur Burton. He had lived with us for numerous years down at Bad Lake, so he bought a house in Wabamun in the 1940s, which is the present site of Mrs. Cooch's place, just west of the post office. And we thought it was a good deal because we got free rent and he got free meals, so it was a mutual agreement. And that's one of the reasons we moved up here, was that because the house was big. It was a big three bedrooms upstairs and another one downstairs. And my parents, liked Wabamun, and the train, the CN train come through here, and the bus, where we lived on the farm, you had to walk 6 miles to get to the train. So anyway, we moved to Wabamun and have enjoyed many years of good living here.
That house you lived in Wabamun, was that known as the tea house or something?
From years ago?
Yeah.
That was something I was just wondering about. After Wilbur sold the place to a fellow there, I can't remember what his name was, he opened up a restaurant in there. And it probably was called, but I can't think of his...
Olson?
No, it was after Wilbur, after we moved out, about 1950. But anyway, it was one of the businesses I'd listed here. Next question.
What are some of your childhood memories regarding schooling and early life in Wabamun?
Yeah, my memories started when I was 4 or 5 years old. I can't remember before that. We lived in a large 2-story, three bedroom home with an upstairs with 3 bedrooms. And like I say, it was huge compared to the little house 8 of us were raised in at Bad Lake. And I remember our closest neighbors were the Brusnicks, who lived across the street in the CN section house. Mr. Brusnick was a mink rancher and a section foreman, and he owned quite a piece of land to the west of our place, where Darlene and Walter ended up living. My favorite memory of Mr. Brusnick was when he would boil up potatoes to feed his pigs. And all us kids would show up there just about the time he was going to drain the water off and he'd give us all a hot potato, and we'd all have our own salt shakers. We'd sit around and eat these potatoes. We thought it was just the greatest.
Yeah.
It was a good time. And the Brusnick boys, Tommy, Walter, and Denny, were always whistling. When I grew up, I wanted to whistle just like Walter. And I guess what I ended up whistling, I had many whistle contests with Walter on many of our fishing trips together. He'd start and I'd finish it, or the other way around. Our other neighbor to the east was a fellow by the name of Mr. Hawley. And
Yeah.
he was in the Boer War, and yeah, he lost his arm in the Boer War, and I was only 4 or 5, and I'd be going downtown or something, and he'd be out in the garden. He had a big hook on that arm. He had a sleeve on it with a hook, and he'd see me coming, and he'd ram it into the fence, and I'd take off running. He used to get the biggest kick out of that. I'd go way out the road around from him. I wouldn't go by his place. He'd laugh. And then next to him was Mr. Catterall. I don't remember what his first name was, but he was. I always figured he was called Catterall because he always had 10 or 20 cats running around his place, and that's where we always went. If we wanted to play with cats, we never had cats at home, but I'd go down there and play with his cats all the time. And then on the other side of us was the Kirkpatricks used to live there, but their house burnt down, I guess, before we come. But then a nice old gentleman by the name of Nick Baggy pulled in a little one-room shack there and lived in there for years. He was a great neighbor. And on the other side of him was Mr. Stone. He used to have goats, so that's where we had to play with goats over at his place. And that was pretty well our neighborhood there. In the back of us, Mr. and Mrs. Warren later moved in, and she was blind, and one of her granddaughters lives in Wabamun now, and they're just super people. Mr. Warren was a used car dealer, and he had vehicles all over everybody's property, but he seemed to make a living at it, so that took care of the neighborhood.
How about the school?
I was just going to say about another memory was the big day was when pretty every day the CN passenger train used to come in, and that would bring mail and passengers, and of course half the town would go down there, and if kids, like the older kids were in school, but us younger kids would all run down there to see who got off the train and watch the mail being unloaded, and Mr. Roxborough was the station agent that I remember. It was ones before that, but I think he was here in the 40s and good memories of going down to the CN station for entertainment. So then I started school at 5 years old in the low school, what they call the low school, and Mrs. Thompson was the teacher. And I really liked Mrs. Thompson, and I was always teased of being her teacher's pet because every once in a while I'd get an apple and bring for her to school. I remember in winter most of the kids would bring a can of soup, and she'd open the soup up and we'd all share in the soup so we didn't have to go home for dinner. It was cold out, so that was a good time too. I remember all the kids there, soup and crackers. Low school grades were 1 to 4, and good memories playing scrub softball and sliding on on the only hill around is where the new fourplex is. That was our sliding hill there, and of course everybody had magic carpets in those days, just a piece of cardboard. And it was a big deal to see who could slide right out to the CNR fence at that time. You were best slider if you could get out to the fence. High school was grades 5 to 9 and was located where the Foster Manor Seniors Home is now. The large spruce trees on that property was planted by older students in the 1920s or 30s, I believe. They are probably 80 to 90 years old, those trees. Mrs. Wilson was the principal, our first principal in 1953. I was in grade 8 and I remember her then, and later on. Some of the other teachers were Mr. Cox, Mr. Courtney, Mr. Dauberthien, and I remember in grade 9, when I went into grade 9, they built a new school here, and I helped move the books and everything over to the new school, and it's been there ever since. There was just 4 rooms at that time, no gym. And some of the memories of the old high school was some of the kids would stay for dinner, and the teacher would go home for dinner, and some of the kids used to throw 22 shells in the old pot-bellied stove. And they'd go off with a bang, and there'd be dust all over the school, and kids running and hiding under desks. And then another one, a great one, was in the spring. Marshall Krasinski's favorite thing, he'd go up to the trestle and get a big ball of garter snakes and bring it to school, and he'd put them in all the girls' desks. Man, there was some screaming went on then. Yeah. When we moved to, I don't know, must have been when was that new school built?
55. 55.
55, yeah. And the community functions, of course, July 1st picnics was always the big time of year, and the parades, the games, the baseball games. The community club put on July 1st. We had lots of kids' games, racing, 3-legged races, wheelbarrow races, ball throws. The natives from Duffield Reserve would come all dressed up in their fancy wear and would dance for us and be in the parades. It really made for a great day. Wabamun always had a baseball team and had a tournament on July 1st. Some of the old timers that played that I remember was Fred Finley was the pitcher, and Bill Woodchuck was the catcher, and Newt Scuttle was the umpire. I remember being the umpire of the town policeman. And for years, every July 1st, it seemed we got rained out or hailed out in the afternoon, and we'd all head for home for 1 or 2 hours till it passed over. But for years, it just seemed like we got hailed out. And then, of course, at night, we had fireworks most of the nights, and then we had everybody saved up their old lumber and that, and Tom Babick had a truck. He'd go around and we'd all load up the truck with this lumber, and they make a teepee down at the ball down at the behind the school there, and they'd start that teepee on fire while the fireworks were going. Man, that was a big day. Everybody has a fire burnt down. Everybody got closer, and I don't know if anybody brought wieners or not, but it was a good time. And another event back in the 40s and 50s was there was a fellow from Stony Plain that used to come out on Thursday nights for a picture show down in the old community hall down there, and he'd slide all the desks off to the side, and we'd put the benches in, and he had this old Chev car with a gas generator in the back to run the motion picture machine, because there was no power in the old schoolhouse there, or the old hall. So I remember that thing was running out there. He'd fill it up, and about halfway through run out of gas, so he had to go gas it up, and we'd have to wait there just like an intermission while he gassed up the generator. But that was good times with Roy Rogers, Dale Evans, Gene Autry Westerns. Boy, we were in heaven. And some of the sports, I played hockey on the old outdoor rinks. We also had skating parties on the lake, and trying to get the girls to skate with you was a big challenge. We always had a bonfire on the lake, and when the lake would freeze over and no snow would come early, us boys would get out there and chase the fish all over the lake, drive them crazy. And we'd skate all the way to Follis and back chasing the whitefish. Oh yeah, I remember there used to be dances in the old hall down there too, and my dad didn't dance, so my mom used to take me with her to the dances, I guess, to keep an eye on her for my dad. But and they used to have box socials where the girls would make sandwiches and that, and all the young guys would bid on them, and that way you got to eat supper with the girl and dance with her for 2 bits, whatever you paid for the box lunch. But I remember I wasn't very old, and I remember I'd end up in the corner with a bunch of coats piled on top of me, and I'd be sleeping there, and my mom would have to dig me out of the coats, take me home. Later on in the 60s and 70s, we had a spring dance called the Cotton Ball. And in the fall and at New Year's is Yule Do dance. We always had locals putting on a stage show. There's some really good shows were put on by the locals. And about the roads and the transportation, when I first come here, I'd never ever seen pavement, so in the 40s and 50s it's all gravel and mud. You get off the main drag and you're in mud, but and transport was everything was trucked in here by a fellow by the name of Buck Deeb from Seba Beach. Had a transport truck, and he would come into town every day. He'd go to Edmonton and pick up, and then he'd drop off groceries all along the line, Wabamun, Follis, Seba, and us kids would just couldn't wait for him. We'd be waiting for to see this truck coming down the road there, and we'd wait at the first store where he stopped, because we'd jump on and help him unload, so we could jump on the back of the truck to ride around town in the next store. And he used to get a kick out of that, and those good memories. The Greyhound bus would stop up on the highway at Wickman's store, and you have to walk up there to get a ticket if you want to go to town. Catch a ride in. And the CN passenger train also came in daily. And I remember before I went to school, I used to go with my dad down to Bad Lake, back to our old farm place down there, and he used to trap rats to make a few extra dollars in the spring. So we'd catch for 2 bits, I think we got a train ride to Duffield, and then we'd get off and walk 6 miles down to the lake and stay there for a week trapping rats, and then he'd come back and sell the pelts to Dermot Turrell. Harry Turrell's dad used to buy all the pelts, 50 cents or $1, and a little extra spending money. Of course, I'd get my 10 cents from my pop out of that. I had good times. I used to, every once in a while, I get to ride the bus to Edmonton, the Greyhound Edmonton, and I'd go watch. Used to go right down to the Greyhound bus depot, and then I'd just walk over to the Rialto and Odeon theaters to watch the movies here. And, those were good old memories too that I had. Moving on to the businesses that I remember, just starting in the east part of town there was the telephone office, which Hilda Majerson and her mother run, and I remember Edna Ward also was one of the operators there. And like you wanted to phone when you went in the booth, you went into the booth, and then Hilda would dial up your number and plug it into Edmonton, I guess, and you'd sit there and talk in the phone, but everybody could hear what you're saying anyway. You could hear it through the booth, but That was the only phone in town, basically, so we had to go down there. Later on, they got the phones that used to ring on the wall there with the, you'd ring two short and one long or something if you wanted to get the operator. And imagine there's still some here in the museum, eh? The old phones.
No, we don't.
No. Some of the other business I remember was Ted's Meat Market, which is right where Tom and Lucy Babiak's home is now. And I believe he was a relation to Woodchucks, the fellow that started that meat market. But it was called Ted's Meat Market after, I think, after he sold it. And Mr. Foster run the Esso service station down, further down by the old red and white store, which I believe the White family owned first, and then Wickman's bought it, and then later on the Wickman's bought the one up at the highway, and then it became a restaurant, Lakeview Restaurant, and B.A. Grudge. That goes back a few years. The B.A. Grudge was the one that was right next to the hotel. Remember where they had that dance hall in there? I remember going in there and seeing people dancing here on Saturday nights. And turned it into a dance hall.
That was after I left. That was for the young people only.
Yeah. So it used to be the old B.A. Grudge, because I remember
Ted's
the old sign.
I know who won the meat market was Artnick.
Yeah.
He was a good ball player.
Art Artnook, yeah.
Yeah.
And then further down the street was the Walker's Hotel, which later on the Brusnicks were one of the buyers, and quite a few buyers before that, but still it's based in the same area. A grocery store, Bamber's apparently run it back in the 30s and 40s, and then I remember the Franks come, the Forsts, the Upcotts, Giffins, and my brother-in-law Don Savard owned it for a year or so. And the pool hall was owned by the Mickatooks, and it burnt down. I don't know what year that was, and then actually Ed Klukas had bought it, and it burnt down, and so Ed built a new one, which is served as a grocery store for years after that. And the Gerhardts, Rosses, Adams, and Specs were some of the grocery people. And I just met a couple of the new grocery people today at the store. I just bought Specs store. So, and also there's the Link Hardware, Arnold Giese, who later developed the Mr. Lube services in Edmonton, went on, and then Wolf Whittoff bought the store off of him, and then we bought it in '77, become the Home Hardware. Going back further yet, other business was the fish packers. There was 2 or 3 different fish packing plants in Wabamun, where they boxed and iced, put the fish in boxes and iced and sent them to Chicago and New York. And when I was a kid, I remember people talking about Wabamun whitefish are some of the best fish in the country. They still are, but they won't let us keep them. Restaurants, well, there was a restaurant up in that old house where we used to live, and Cooch's now live, and it was a tea house, like Darlene was saying. It's for a couple of years anyway. And the other big businesses in town, there was 9 or 12 mink ranches spread out all through the northern part of Wabamun there, and they were here because of the, I guess, in the fish in the lake and the other lakes around. And also, I remember when we were kids, the train would bring a boxcar of fish in, and we'd help unload the frozen fish from BC. They'd all have their freezers, and we'd fill up the freezers with frozen fish and horse meat, and for years. But the Brusnicks, the Harrisons, Kerchinskis, Herlicks, Goyans, King, Joe Johnson, Ivans, Bennetts, Stograns, it's all all part of the old.
You missed the
mink
first one, Sprague.
Sprague. We mentioned that with
one to bring mink into Wabamun.
Janice. That was where Johnson's ended up,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah, and mentioning boat rentals, well, Mr. Brusnick rented boats, and Mr. Herlick rented boats, and in later years, Mr. Cunningham had boats down at where the present pier is there. And I noticed that Brusnick's boat rental pier, excuse me, the pilings are still sticking out of the water down there, and they must be 80 or 90 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were good. I don't know if
Long time.
tamarack or what they were, but they're still there. And the ice fishing in the wintertime, commercial ice fishing, I mentioned, and Arctic Ice used to be here every winter, shipping ice into Edmonton for the passenger trains, and I guess it was door to door too, I don't know. But lots of skating on the lake in the early years. Our favorite swimming hole was at the Trestle, and also at Lakeview here. They had a little pier there, but they didn't like us locals coming there. And I remember one time Ron Lindsay dove off the end of the pier and broke his neck, cracked his neck in there. But they always used to put the run on us local boys from Wabamun if we went down there. But so anyway, we ended up after the TransAlta built their power plant. We used to go in the outlet canal. That was a good place to fish or to swim, and it was nice warm water too. So, and Wabamun has always been a good sailing lake. I know that over the years they've talked about people that have won world record sailing contests that learned to sail on Wabamun Lake. And the winds, the northwest winds, and the way the lake is lying is ideal for sailing, so that'll go on for years. I remember we'd always go over to Mr. Brusnick and ask if we could rent or borrow a boat from him, and he'd always give us a couple oars, and we'd go down there, and then 4 or 5 of us guys would go out in the boat, and we'd get out there and run all over them weeds trying to find birds' nests, and then we'd go snare fish, and then we'd sell the fish back to the mink ranch for 5 cents a pound. But we wouldn't pay for the boat. I don't recall too much about the doctors in the village. That was before 1940s, I think, when the doctors, I've read about them, but from 1940 to 80, there was one doctor we brought into town, Dr. Devine. That must have been in the 60s.
Dr.
80s.
Was it 80s?
Dr. Holt. Dr. Walton used to be the one doctor from Spruce Grove, Dr. Oakway, and
but they'd come out from
Dr.
Stony Plain, they'd come out.
Yeah.
But there used to be a doctor in town here years and years ago, but that was before.
Well, that was Dr. McCarthy.
Dr.
That's
McCarthy.
the guy that
Yeah.
came to my mother one day, and this was years ago, and my mother thought all the English people were against Ukrainians and that, they'd laugh at. But he came and he said, "Hilda, have you got any garlic?" "Oh no, Mr. Dr. McCarthy, I don't." "Oh, I see it there. Look at the long row you got on it. Why do you tell me don't?" "Well, she says, people laugh at me because I grow garlic. My wife and I like it, and I'd like to buy some." My wife said, "Well, go get yourself some." Pretty soon she had to stop because he'd taken the whole row out. "Oh, Dr. McCarthy, you got to stop someplace." And now he says, "Nobody will see me for 3 days because I locked the door. Me and my wife chew it all up, and he will stop it for 3 days.
Yeah, so, and also with the ambulance,
None.
there wasn't, I couldn't remember any ambulance here until later on in the county.
The neighbor's car.
That's right, yeah. The fire department, we used to use Wolf Ingeniski's station wagon
Yeah.
to transport. I remember the first fire we had to take two people that were burnt in a fire up along Ascot Beach there. But anyway, the policing, the municipal district of Stony Plain supplied the policing here because we were in a village in those days, and Mr. Newt Scuttle was the town policeman at that time, and he patrolled on foot mostly, and us kids had a ball trying to get Mr. Scuttle to chase us. We'd go down around the bar there and he'd chase us. He had a 5-cell flashlight and he'd shine it on us, and we'd take off and hide and run. Just a great time. And then in 1960 to 1980, the county police station was built in Wabamun and next to the fire hall, and Mr. Scuttle, Louis Ivan, Marshall Walker, Keith Nickel, Pete Nizwenko, Bart Brent, Art Beckett, some of the previous policemen that they actually lived in Wabamun, and we had our own police station here, which later became the town village office. So now we share 2 peace officers with the summer village of Seba Beach. Churches, I remember the Anglican church well because I was baptized there in 1944, and now is the Wake Up Inn. It's a coffee shop turned into a coffee shop, which is kind of a popular place in town. And the Catholic Church, which has moved once for sure, and the United Church, it's been relocated on the same property, but and telephone, well, Hilda Majerson is the operator with her, and that's where I ended. What else?
What kind of telephone did you have in your house?
We never had one.
Even
We were too poor.
when
No,
Nobody had any telephones.
nobody had
you know.
telephones.
No.
Like I remember the store had, when there Gifford's
If
had
you
one
wanted
in
a
the
phone,
back.
you went down to the telephone office or you went to the store.
Yeah,
okay.
and it was that one on the wall that you rang.